Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. So in this segment, I'll be continuing with the discussion of the Form I-130. Today, I'm going to be discussing the various parts of the Form I-130. And as I said, the Form I-130 is a 12-page form. It's divided into 9 parts. So if you're using an attorney, the attorney will complete the part before Part 1. Part 1, it's all about the petitioner's relationship to the beneficiary. So whether you're the son, the spouse, the brother, the sister, there's a time for you to identify that relationship. Part 2 is the petitioner's information. That is the residence history, the employment history, and the marital history. Part 3 is the petitioner's biographic information. Part 4 is the beneficiary's information. So where the beneficiary will be applying for either the adjustment of status or the immigrant petition. Part 5 is the other information. That's if you have previously filed this petition for the beneficiary or for some other person. Part 6 is the petitioner's statement, the declaration, contact information, and the signature. Part 7 is the biographic information. Part 8 is the interpreter's information. And Part 9 is additional information. So in completing this form, it has to be consistent and be complete as well as accurate. Try especially to complete the questions, and if it's not complete, you don't want immigration sending your application back or rejecting your application. So be careful when you're completing that application. So I've received a few questions regarding the Form I-130, and I'll be willing to discuss and share the answers to those questions with you, and also encourage you to contact me if you have additional questions. So the first question I have is, how many Form I-130 petitions can I file? So the answer will be, you can file as many Form I-130 petitions, but you have to make sure you're filing for eligible relatives. So let's say you have 5 siblings. You can apply for all 5 siblings at the same time, but then you have to meet up with the financial requirements. For each sibling, you have to file a separate Form I-130. And so the answer is yes, you can file more than one Form I-130. The next question is, can I file I-130 Form I-130 while abroad? And the answer is, it depends. Mostly, yes, you can file the I-130 here in the United States, even if you're abroad or outside the United States. But there are some exceptional situations where the Form I-130 can be filed outside the United States, and this is at the U.S. consulate in your country. But I advise you to have a lawyer advise you on that, because it does not apply to everybody, and there is a process for doing that. So yes, it is possible to file that at the embassy, but then you'd want to make sure you're using a lawyer or you're making the proper inquiry. The next question is, does the approval of Form I-130 mean that my relative is a permanent resident? And the answer is no. Your relative is not a permanent resident because he or she received an approved I-130. Rather, Form I-130 approval just means that you have satisfied USCIS that your relative is indeed your relative, or your spouse is indeed your spouse. But there are certain situations where United States citizenship will ask you for additional information because they're not satisfied that this person is your relative. So The mere approval of an I-130 does not mean that your relative has a green card. Rather, it means that your relative can now apply for a green card. The next question is, will my relative be required to appear for an interview? So the answer to this question will be, it really depends. And it will depend on where your relative is filing from. If your relative is in the United States and you're filing just the I-130, sometimes, yes, you may be subjected to an interview. If USCIS has any doubt. But if your relative is outside the United States, you may also be subjected to an interview. Your relative may be subjected to an interview, and that's where the consular officer or the consular office has any doubts. So in some scenarios, you can have the USCIS contact you to attend an interview just for the I-130. But I know that for the most part, for most people who are in the United States, they file their I-130 with the adjustment of status application. So sometimes you have those interviews combined, or sometimes they're separate. So the answer to that is it will depend. And yes, it is possible to have an interview for the I-130. The next question is, what if my relative, who is the petitioner, dies? What options do I have? So yes, that's a possibility. If your petitioner, that's your relative, the petitioner, dies during the process, it really depends on how far along you are in the process. Meaning it could be either that your relative died immediately after filing the I-130, but before it became approved, or your relative died after the approval of the I-130. For either of these scenarios, yes, your I-130, under the law, usually it will be that it's automatically revoked because the person who petitioned for you is no longer there. However, there are scenarios and exceptions and strategies for reinstating that I-130. So it'd be best to contact an attorney to see what your options are. So the next question is, if my status changes from lawful permanent resident to US citizen, what should I do? And the person referenced that he's applying for a relative outside the United States. So if your relative, if you're a lawful permanent resident and you filed an I-130 for your relative who is outside the United States, and after filing that I-130, you became a citizen. So you have to notify the USCIS. And if after filing the the I-130 for your relative, it became approved and you became a US citizen, you still need to inform the National Visa Center. So I always try to contact an attorney to let you know which option or what you should do. But the option you should not explore is just keeping quiet or not doing anything, assuming that USCIS will easily update that. Now you should need to take action. So what if the petitioner and beneficiary divorce? Yeah, unfortunately, yes, that happens. So if the petitioner and beneficiary get divorced, maybe after filing the I-130, that I-130 may be revoked. And again, it will depend on where they are in the process, with the process. So because the petitioner is filing the I-130 based on the marriage, and the marriage is no more, then yes, it will make sense that the I-130 may not also be available. But again, it's always better to contact an attorney, especially if after the couple, that's the petitioner and the beneficiary, get divorced and the petitioner remarries somebody else or the beneficiary remarries somebody else. So it's best to always contact an attorney to find out what strategy or what options are. So what if my Form I-130 is denied or revoked? Are there options? Yes, there are options. And those options are what you can discuss with your attorney, because each case is different and you'd want to make sure that your attorney knows the whole story before advising you. So yes, there are options, and an attorney will give you a best strategy or best options in those kind of scenarios. So I have a few other questions, and I'll take one more question. And that's for children. My child was unmarried at the time I petitioned for him, but he's now married. What do I do? Okay, so if you're petitioning for your child who is unmarried, whether as a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, and there are changes, yes, things happen, especially if you're a lawful permanent resident. It takes so many years before, the visa number becomes available. You'd want to make sure that that information is shared with your attorney, because there's certain steps that need to be taken. So if you are applying for someone based on the fact that that person or the son or daughter is unmarried at the time of petition, that person is given a visa category based on that status because you're unmarried. So if you become married, you really should not be in that status. And this is something you have to discuss with an attorney to be able to let you know how to go about that process. But action needs to be taken. So that will bring me to the end of this segment on the I-130. And I would thank you for tuning in and would welcome any feedback you have or questions you may have regarding the Form I-130 or anything in immigration. I'll look forward to answering those questions. So thank you for tuning in. And if you have questions, don't fail to contact me at 713-730-2900. And as always, please don't forget to subscribe to Tempo Afrique. Thank you.
My whole life, my father told me stories about moving to the United States. He would tell me that his brother, my Uncle George, was already living here and let my father stay with him for a while. Through my Uncle George, my father was introduced to our cultural organization here in America, who helped him make connections, apply for college, find his first job, and adjust to life in a completely different culture than he was used to. The Cultural Association helped him get started on his new life. My Uncle George would bring my father with him to the annual Summer Cultural Groups Festival, and later, he would bring me. It was incredible to see so many people of all ages laughing and celebrating with food and song and dance. It brought back the best feelings of home and gave my father the opportunity to pass his culture, language, and values on to me. My father and Uncle George were very close, so when George died last year, my father wanted to honor his wishes to be buried with a traditional ceremony back at his birthplace. My father told me that because Uncle George had cultural group life insurance, he was able to afford to bring George home and have the traditional burial George wanted. Though my father had been able to honor my Uncle George's wishes, it got me thinking about my own family. One day, I'd have to make the same arrangements for my own parents, and my wife's parents as well. Of course, we would want to bring them home and honor their wishes, but it would be a financial hardship for our family. There were a lot of things to think about, even though I really didn't want to think about them at all. When my father told me about cultural group life insurance, he told me it's intended to help families when they need it the most. It's not tied to an employer, so no matter where my career takes me, I'll always have coverage. The more people who participate and the younger they are, the more it helps keep the insurance premiums down for the entire association. Because my parents have cultural group term life insurance, there will be money available to help me provide the kind of service I want to give my parents. And by joining, I can put my mind at ease and continue to celebrate our traditions into the future. With cultural group life insurance, I can worry less and spend more of my time celebrating with the people who matter most to me.
C'est encore Yves Kenao, c'est toujours Yves Kenao qui revient. Cette fois-ci, pour vous dire que Tempo Afrique TV vous offre plus de 4000 chaînes de télévision